Boa noite a todos e a todas. Eu gostaria de dar início a esse evento. É um seminário Diálogos para a Transição Ecológica, que tem o apoio da Cátedra Unesco, a cidade que educa, a cidade que transforma, do Grupo de Pesquisa Direito e Desenvolvimento Sustentável, do Ministério Público Federal e o projeto Conexão Água, e também, com muito carinho, né, tem esse apoio do Consulado do Canadá aqui em São Paulo, além da Secretaria de Justiça. E, para dar início, nós temos, normalmente, só para explicar para o Dão, que é o nosso palestrante, que eu vou apresentar na sequência, nós temos uma devocional, um início de conferências, de palestras importantes. Nós temos esse movimento aqui no Mackenzie, que é compartilhar os valores, os princípios dessa instituição. Então, eu tenho um grande prazer, um grande carinho, de chamar o reverendo Piacente para fazer a devocional para a nossa abertura.
Está funcionando, alô, som. Está funcionando muito bem. Obrigado, professora Solange, doutora Eduarda Brunhosa, que representa a Direx, e a todos os demais convidados. Temos o doutor Zé Paulo também lá no fundo. Obrigado pela presença de vocês. Eu quero compartilhar um texto muito precioso. É um salmo, ou seja, uma poesia hebraica, bastante conhecido. Essa poesia está no Salmo 19, e eu quero que seja um instrumento para pensarmos nesse tema que diz respeito à criação. Muito mais do que a ecologia, de fato, mas a como as coisas foram criadas e o motivo da sua criação, é claro, isso é muito importante para nós. Eu acho que todos nós conhecemos um pensador, na verdade um escritor, chamado Goethe. Escreveu uma das obras mais conhecidas da literatura, a famosa obra de Fausto. Uma história extraordinária, cheia de reviravoltas. Não é à toa que demorou 60 anos para ser produzida. Ele tem uma frase que é extremamente oportuna para a ocasião. E ele diz assim: a natureza é o único livro que tem um conteúdo proveitoso em todas as suas folhas. Veja o brilhantismo dele. A natureza é o único livro que tem um conteúdo proveitoso em todas as suas folhas. Nem sempre as folhas de um livro têm conteúdos proveitosos, mas com certeza, essa criação que nós conhecemos, da maneira como Deus a fez, em cada uma das suas folhas, tem um conhecimento muito precioso. É claro que a obra de Fausto, ela também nos traz uma reflexão, porque Fausto tinha tudo: doutor em teologia, doutor em medicina, em direito. Era um homem extremamente versado, mas ele queria mais. E ao buscar mais, acabou cometendo um grave erro. Vendeu a sua alma para o diabo. Na verdade, o livro é mais conhecido por isso. A história do homem que vendeu a sua alma para o diabo. Mefistófeles faz uma oferta e ele aceita. E depois o restante do livro ele tentando recuperar a alma. Parece que essa é de fato a história do ser humano. Nós temos o melhor. Temos tudo que Deus criou. Nós temos o melhor à nossa disposição, mas às vezes na ganância e na ânsia de querer mais e mais e mais, vendemos a nossa alma. É sempre necessário ler o que as Escrituras têm para nos dizer, porque falam com clareza o motivo desse livro tão amado por Goethe, que é a criação, também ser amado por nós. No Salmo 19 diz assim, Salmo de Davi, ao regente do coro: o céu anuncia a glória de Deus e nos mostra aquilo que suas mãos fizeram. Cada dia dessa glória, ou cada dia fala dessa glória ao dia seguinte. E cada noite repete isso a outra noite. Não há discurso nem palavras, e não se ouve nenhum som. No entanto, a voz do céu se espalha pelo mundo inteiro, e as suas palavras alcançam a terra toda. Ainda bem que existe um livro, que cada uma das suas folhas tem um conteúdo precioso. Esse livro é a criação. E cada vez que você virar uma dessas páginas, você não vai encontrar outra pessoa, senão o Criador. Que bom que nós celebremos o cuidado com a criação, porque no final das contas, estamos celebrando o cuidado com o próprio Criador. Deus abençoe sua vida. Eu espero que seja uma palestra muito edificante de fato, que seja algo especial para o Mackenzie. E a minha oração por vocês é para que Deus dê a cada um o cuidado necessário, não só para ler as páginas da criação, mas para cuidar delas. Porque para que o homem se torne enlouquecido e venda a sua alma, não é nada difícil. Deus abençoe você. Obrigado.
Muito obrigada, reverendo, por essas palavras que nos enchem o coração, né, dessa graça de Deus para nós podermos continuar na nossa caminhada. Queria aproveitar também e cumprimentar o doutor José, aqui presente, e passo imediatamente a palavra a uma pessoa que foi fundamental para que nós estejamos aqui hoje, né? O doutor, meu querido amigo, o doutor Eduardo Abrunhosa, né? Doutor Eduardo Abrunhosa, além de estar à frente da Direx, ele é presidente da Cátedra Unesco, que é quem está por trás, né, desse apoio institucional e desse apoio para que nós possamos estar realizando esses seminários, porque eu, particularmente dentro da Cátedra, faço parte de um grupo de trabalhos sobre territórios e transição ecológica.
Boa noite a todos aqui presentes. Como bom luso brasileiro, em Portugal nós resolvemos muito facilmente essa questão de todos e todas. Nós saudamos a toda a gente aqui presente. Então, boa noite a toda a gente aqui presente, e assim todos se sintam devidamente saudados. Ao meu querido colega de diretoria executiva, José Paulo, nosso diretor financeiro, na verdade, o homem que paga as nossas contas, e a nós, professores, o nosso salário. Por isso que eu ando sempre com ele, porque é uma pessoa que deve ser bem tratada. Reverendo Piacente, a minha querida colega, amiga, doutora Solange, professora doutora Solange. A Cátedra Unesco, Cidades que Educam, Transformam, ela tem um objetivo na sua origem. Quando criado, a sede fica da Cátedra em Lisboa, e nós congregamos universidades e pesquisadores prioritariamente da comunidade lusófona. Então, Brasil, África, Portugal e países de Ásia. Mas ela também é aberta e dialoga com os países da América Latina, do continente americano como um todo. Por isso, quando Solange nos trouxe, olha, eu tenho uma oportunidade da gente trazer para o nosso debate sobre a questão do território e sobre a questão de como as relações do território, a cultura, formam e educam de maneira absolutamente não formal. Isso nos interessa. Então, enquanto pesquisadores das mais diversas áreas, aqui na nossa universidade nós temos pessoas do direito, nós temos pessoas da arquitetura, da educação, como eu, temos pessoas da área da economia, são professores de diversas áreas. A nossa preocupação é, neste século, que é o século das cidades, neste século, que é o século onde o território tem se transformado ainda e cada vez mais no ponto de discordância e disputa, seja em que escala nós pensarmos isso, qual a relação que existe entre nós, cidadãos, pessoas, enquanto agentes de transformação. E qual é a contribuição nossa, como pesquisadores, professores, agentes públicos, no processo de formação para uma mentalidade planetária, integral e integradora? Esse é o nosso desafio enquanto cátedra. Assim, um evento como este, ele nos proporciona trazer um saber local, como nós iremos ouvir aqui hoje. Eu, infelizmente, não conseguirei ouvir, porque nós estamos em reunião de conselho de administração, do nosso board, e eu estou lá para dar apoio moral para o Zé Paulo, porque eu cuido do orçamento e eu cortei as coisas que ele vai pagar. Então, a gente está se apoiando um ao outro, então eu vou ter que sair. Mas vamos ouvir aqui um saber específico, de uma tradição específica e de uma relação específica com o território que educa, que ensina, que agrega. E esta troca de experiência e de saberes, com certeza também nos educará, com certeza também nos formará. Eu quero, para encerrar a minha fala, deixar com vocês, partilhar com vocês, um fragmento de uma canção que hoje de manhã eu acordei, coloquei o Spotify para tocar, quer dizer, eu acordei não, eu levantei, né? Eu levantei, coloquei o Spotify para tocar, fui fazer minhas coisas, e enquanto isso a música tocava. E lá, num dado momento, uma das canções que rodava na playlist me chamou a atenção pela letra. Eu falei, olha, eu vou ler hoje à noite, porque isso tem tudo a ver. E aí, a letra diz o seguinte: cuida do passarinho e também da flor. Eles esperam pelo teu amor. Faz do teu lar um ninho e do mundo um chão, onde se planta paz e comunhão, para que brote e cresça a mais viva semente, para que a gente tenha o que colher, para que o pão que venha a ser por nós assado seja sinal traçado de viver. Faz tua casa nova na varanda do velho chão. Convida o teu irmão para vir morar contigo. Planta paredes novas, feitas para servir de lar e abrigo. Faz um café gostoso, põe a mesa no teu jardim, deixa que assim as plantas tenham paz contigo. Convida o universo, faz a vida ganhar maior sentido. Cuida da tua morada, cuida do teu pequeno mundo, deixa o teu irmão bem perto e venha ser livre. Isso é uma canção. Depois eu mando para a Solange o link para vocês ouvirem com música. É uma canção de um músico popular brasileiro chamado João Alexandre, que é maravilhosa e que fala sobre essa nossa relação, esse nosso conhecimento planetário, as nossas relações que são transcendentes. Nós não fomos feitos simplesmente para vir à faculdade. Nós não fomos simplesmente feitos para termos diplomas, títulos, conta bancária, andar bem vestido e bonito. Nunca serei tão bonito quanto a professora Solange, nem se eu nascer de novo. Não é só para isso que nós fomos feitos. Nós fomos feitos para viver cuidando um do outro, do passarinho e da flor, do irmão, do chão, do abrigo, e todos juntos viverem absolutamente unidos. A nós foi entregue a ordem de cuidar deste mundo. A nós foi entregue o direito de cuidar desse mundo. O problema é que nós não temos feito isto. E, claro, vamos pagar por isto. Não tem como fugir. Eu não sei qual é o coletivo de cobras. Alguém sabe Tudo bem, não sei. Enxame. Estamos vivendo, por exemplo, no colégio e no campus nosso, do Mackenzie, em Alphaville, um enxame de cobras. Cobras por conta da mudança climática, cobras por conta do excesso de chuvas ou do excesso de calor, saem dos seus ninhos e resolveram vir para áreas onde hoje estão as crianças. Essa semana, nós capturamos 16 cobras que não andavam por ali, que não estavam por ali. Eu não estou falando de cobras simpáticas. Eu estou falando de cobras peçonhentas, venenosas. Eu estou falando de cascavel, surucucu, coral, grandes, que começaram a vir para onde as pessoas estavam. Isso não faz o menor sentido. Isso tem que ter alguma explicação. E, com certeza, a explicação passa pelo fato de nós não estarmos fazendo o que o poeta pediu que fizéssemos. Cuidássemos do nosso mundo. Cuidássemos da nossa morada. Cuida do passarinho, cuida também da flor, porque eles querem nada mais do que o seu amor. Professora Solange, aos nossos convidados, que vocês tenham uma excelente noite. Infelizmente, com o coração partido, eu preciso sair, porque a noite ainda vai ser longa para nós, mas recebam o abraço especial do Mackenzie, do Instituto Presbiteriano Mackenzie, da Cátedra Unesco. A casa é de vocês. Que tenham um bom evento. Muito obrigado. Paz e comunhão. Eu mando para a SO o link.
Bom, Eduardo, é sempre covardia falar depois de você, né? Ainda bem que eu não estou falando, eu só estou como presidente de mesa e vou passando a palavra, tá? Muito obrigada. Imagina, e que bom que o universo conspirou para que nós pudéssemos estar juntos aqui hoje, para que nós possamos ainda continuar juntos hoje e dar sequência a essas nossas discussões. Eu aproveito e passo a palavra diretamente à consulessa para assuntos políticos e diplomáticos do cônsul-geral do Canadá em São Paulo, Pascal Tiviergy, dizendo não somente welcome, bienvenue aussi, porque ela vem do Quebec. E, antes disso, entretanto, aproveito para chamar para compor a mesa também a Daniele Akemi, que é coordenadora de povos indígenas da Secretaria Municipal de Direitos Humanos. Por favor.
Boa noite, bonsoir. Merci pour cette occasion de parler français. And happy to see you here. Eu vou falar em português hoje. O Dana, eu sou hoje tradutora dele, mas ele sabe o que eu vou falar. Queria primeiro agradecer vocês, Universidade Mackenzie. É um prazer de estar aqui, minha primeira vez. Realmente muito feliz de conhecer os estudantes, professores, pesquisadores, etc. Agradecendo também a Giovana, mas também a Secretaria de Justiça e Cidadania do Estado de São Paulo, e muito feliz de ver também a Prefeitura, que são parcerias de São Paulo. Essas são parcerias muito importantes, porque cuidam do ambiente onde a gente... Eu moro em São Paulo, então muito obrigada por isso. É uma grande alegria, então, estar com você nesse espaço de escuta, de troca e inspiração. Estamos reunidos para receber um convidado muito especial que vem do Canadá, o Dana Tiziatram, ex-chefe da primeira nação Vuntut Quechin, localizada no extremo norte do nosso país, Canadá, no coração do Ártico canadense. Dana é um líder indígena, defensor da justiça climática, pensador e inovador. Ele representa uma voz essencial que o Canadá tem um orgulho de apoiar e amplificar. Uma voz que une conhecimento ancestral, liderança política e compromisso com o futuro do planeta. É importante lembrar que o Canadá é uma nação ártica. O Ártico representa mais de 40% do território canadense, 70% do nosso litoral, e é lá de uma população majoritariamente indígena, essa área. essa região está passando por transformações profundas devido às mudanças climáticas e os povos que vivem lá estão entre os primeiros a sentir seus impactos e também entre os primeiros a apresentar soluções inovadoras e sustentáveis. Por isso, o Canadá lançou recentemente uma nova política externa para o Ártico, com foco na paz, no desenvolvimento sustentável e no protagonismo dos povos indígenas. A visita de Dana ao Brasil, passando por São Paulo, até hoje, é o último evento dele aqui em São Paulo, depois vai para Brasília e depois para o Rio, tem como objetivo de criar pontes entre realidades diferentes, mais conectadas. Ele vem compartilhar suas experiências, mas também ouvir e dialogar com vocês, estudantes, pesquisadores jovens e menos jovens, mas somos todos jovens. Especialmente, teve contatos com grupos indígenas hoje e ontem, então também isso enriqueceu para ele a perspectiva brasileira. Então, com pesquisadores, amplifica ainda mais. São Paulo é um lugar de força em inovação, juventude, cultura, mobilização social e ação climática. E é por isso que esse encontro é tão especial. Conectar o local ao global, como falou o professor, o ancestral ao tecnológico, o norte ao sul. Então, desejo para vocês uma ótima noite e conversa. Muito obrigada de novo e conexões humanas importantes.
Boa noite, desculpa o atraso, a gente estava na secretaria até agora e acabei me atrasando. Eu estou atualmente trabalhando na Secretaria de Direitos Humanos aqui da cidade de São Paulo. Estou coordenadora da Coordenação de Povos Indígenas e a gente tem aqui uma coordenação que trata e cuida das políticas públicas para a população indígena que está na cidade. Nós temos aqui, não sei se vocês já tiveram a oportunidade de conhecer indígenas aldeados e também no contexto urbano, que é o que acaba chocando muita gente que não tem esse conhecimento. Então, estou aqui para apresentar a coordenação e, principalmente, para convidar todos vocês a irem até lá, conhecer o nosso trabalho, conhecer essas comunidades que tanto têm para nos trazer, para nos apresentar e para nos engrandecer como pessoas. Obrigada.
Então, já podemos... So go ahead with 20 minutes, perhaps, and then we'll welcome questions, and that's the way we'll manage in a facilitated way. Like you did today, as
Dringwinzi, Shilaknai, Keguada, Vindagadachu, Nithan. Vaji, Chijint Alt E, Oji. Yendu, Chitnali, Vandakwichin. Aha. I give you all thanks and welcome Creator into our discussions today. My name is Father of Young Eagle. I am the former chief of the Vantakwichin First Nation, 80 miles north of the Arctic Circle in northwestern Canada. We are the most northwestern settlement. We are the last community in the Northwest. We are 60 miles east of the Alaska border as the only community in the Yukon without a road, as was the direction from our elders, wanting to protect our people from the world, which was already coming too fast. And although many parts of it were welcomed, there are many aspects that come with modernization that we continue to struggle with today. I am the first generation born off of the land. My grandparents raised their children without electricity, hunting and trapping. The way that our women would traditionally give birth, which is finding two trees in which to hold. We never gave birth lying down. And that's how my family came to be. With the residential school systems, my family was taken from their community and put into residential schools, where if they spoke their language, they would not eat, where punishment and physical and just about every form of abuse came readily and daily. I was born into this world in 1987, according to the Gregorian Julian calendar. But if we move past that for a moment and afford you a window into our disposition in time and space, before the written word of man, our people had complicated governance systems calibrated into the stars. We had a constellation, Vidigadachu, which had 4 appendages and tools and a tail, so 5 points. And as Vidigadachu moved through the sky, it signaled animal seasons, our gathering seasons, our whole way of life was calibrated into the stars in a far more complex system in which anthropologists are barely scraping today. And to give you an example of the inertia of colonialism, the inertia of the romanticization or the dehumanization of indigenous peoples, in the Yucatan Peninsula here in South America was the remains found of what is now admonished as the oldest human remains in the Americas, which is the 16-year-old girl found by Sri Lankers in a cave, carbon dating to 12,500 years ago. In our community of Old Crow, 36 miles out of our community, anthropologists have found evidence of our presence, carbon dating to 24,000 years ago. This is not accepted by the anthropological community, but our stories go back even further than this. Our first story starts with the Great Flood, in which the whole earth was covered in water. We had in our canoe with us muskrat, otter, beaver, the aquatic animals, duck, and we asked the animals to dive into the water and to retrieve earth for us, and none of the animals could make it. Each one dived down, and we would watch the bubbles on the surface, and each animal came up empty-handed, except for beaver. Beaver swam down so deep and for so long that our fears came true, and beaver floated up to the surface dead. But the beaver had earth in its paw. And that's where our people took this earth and we grew it into the lands. But we traveled from these lands. I carry the story of Jikayu-Tai, the first Gwich'in man, and we did not walk over the ice land bridge. We navigated the waters beside it. And back in this time of over 30,000 to 35,000 years ago, beavers were 9 feet tall. There were sloths in the Yukon that their backs would touch the ceiling. We had camels, saber-toothed tigers, woolly mammoths. The land was not safe for us, but we began to move. And when we came to Chugaihan, which is now known as Yukon, Chugaihan went to the animals and he conversed with them, and he told them, you can no longer eat our people, that we are coming here to make peace, to make a home, and we must live together. And so Jikayu-Tai took his medicines and he traveled, shrinking each one of the animals as his final act for our people. And we have been there to this day. Recently at COP25, I met a group of Ecuadorian youth who saw my traditional clothing and asked me to sit with them. We began speaking with each other, and I told them about 25,000 years ago, a group of our people left us, and they told us they wanted to find where the sun went, and they went down south. You can now find our language all across the Americas, in the Dakotas, through the Navajo, all the way down into, in fact, and I can't corroborate this, but perhaps even the Azteca were a part of our people, as when they came down south with the vision to start a city where an eagle with a snake in his talon lands on a desert cactus with a blooming flower. The Aztecas said that they came from the land of white, which is where our people come from. But as we conversed with each other, this young Ecuadorian burst into a smile and said, "We call ourselves the people of the sun, and our legends say that we came from the north." And right there, we embraced each other. And through our oral histories, our sociological and cultural technologies, we facilitated more than a relationship, more than a community, but family. And we embraced each other like the brothers that we were, that had found each other after 25,000 years, before any written word of man. And then right beside us, two businessmen introduced each other and shook their hands very stiffly, and we burst into laughter. I think this is the excellent example of where we are in modern systems that were born from the mechanized philosophies of Descartes, Galileo, and Newton, who tried to deduce the elegant and multi-dimensional grand mystery of the universe to pure mechanics, convincing us that all particles were simply like a pool table, and if we could understand the mechanisms, we could understand the universe. But what our colonial brother does not understand is that they are searching for eternity in the folds of infinity, and you will never find it there. To search in infinity is a fool's errand. Indigenous peoples already occupy eternity, and it's here on earth. A perspective changes our entire view on the world. We know how language changes the mind. How too can we position people outside of the colonial technologies which have brought us many, many good things? The gun in my community, when it reached us, we increased the health of the animals and of the plants, which sounds counterintuitive. If you use a gun to wipe out a buffalo species, it's not the gun's fault. It's the intention of the people using it. When I was taught how to hunt and trap in my territory, which is 55,000 square kilometers of protected territory, we have settled our land title agreements and our self-government agreements with the Crown of Canada, the Crown, which is above the Prime Minister. Our agreements are constitutionally entrenched. We are a government that works on a bilateral level with the Prime Minister, and we negotiate our federal transfer agreements directly with the Crown, so no government besides our own is administered the monies for us to administer to our peoples. And hopefully I have time to get into the real elegant mechanics of enabling and empowering communities. And notice how I did not just say indigenous, but communities. Because one of the things that I see across the world, from and as an indigenous person, I ask, when did our communities become so disempowered? When did all of our problems become a prime minister or a president's fault? And when was the responsibility of the future of our world just left to an international negotiator at COP, filled with an impossible mandate? When did our communities begin forgetting our power? I feel like we've all lost some power, that the world, we are letting it convince us, the modern world, that we are powerless. We need the John F. Kennedys, who stood at a podium in 1960 and said that we will be on the moon, and we did it in less than 10 years. We didn't even have the telemetry. Now our cell phones have far more computational power than all of NASA's computers, and we put someone on the moon. You cannot tell me we cannot deal with climate change. But let's not be mistaken. Climate change is not a climate issue. It's a narrative issue. We have approached the earth with an unstable model. The model is not correct. And so, of course, only through time should the world become unstable. As much as we would like to blame the Trump administrations or everyone else, we have to be and have the strength to stand up for ourselves, our families, the birthright of your children who deserve better than what you have inherited. Because once we accept these calamities and once we accept these harms, we harm ourselves. Once we balance this, then the world will become balanced. This is the most important part. And this is where my people and us today, and this speech is a part of our people's prophecy. We are in N'inli. N'inli is too much of a complicated topic for me to explain the full extent of the word, which could take a full day by our elders. But quickly, it is the Gwich'in thermodynamics. It's the laws of the universe. And N'inli is an observation by Gwich'in that says the birth of new cycles must come from the death of old cycles. We are in N'inli, and a new world will be born from the death of an old one. And I'm sure you feel the same as I do, that we must molt the husk of a neoliberal capitalistic society in late stage. We find ourselves in an awkward entropy. And through hypernormalization, which we've seen many times throughout society, it shows that studies around the world, many people can picture the end of the world due to capitalism, but they cannot offer you an alternative. This, now we go back not to simply degrees, but human ingenuity and imagination. Happiness comes from freedom, and freedom comes from courage. Over leadership, we need courage, and over words, we need balanced thoughts. In my territory, where I come from, everything that you can experience, that you can see, hear, taste, and feel has changed and has continued to changing. Studies are showing that our territory in the Arctic is changing 3 times faster than the rest of the world. We've been speaking about this since the 70s, when our elders noticed these changes, and I will list a few. As Gwich'in people, Vantat Gwich'in of the many lakes, my territory above the Arctic Circle has thousands of lakes. The land looks like a snake moving between water systems. And in the 70s, you used to be able to hear across the lakes, but now the willows are so thick and so large, they are overtaking our traditional trails. When we would walk across the areas of France into Alaska, the same land size, we would walk into Alaska and Northwest Territories. Our old trails are being overgrown. We have lakes that are emptying into the river systems, like Zelma Lake. These are traditional hunting grounds that we survive on. We are now finding larger levels of mercury, which through the fish and us as animals have a biological term, biomagnification. We and the fish and the birds lack the systems to remove mercury from our systems. So now in my community, we already have warnings for pregnant women and young children not to eat the livers of the fish. But there are much, much bigger problems. Studies are now showing through 50 boreholes that were done across the Arctic and all across the different continents, they are now deducing that there is over 50 metric tons of mercury just waiting in the permafrost. What are we going to do when this mercury begins bleeding into our systems? And this is just one of many impactful environmental pillars that are already in action. I'm not sure that we can stop all of this. We're now seeing changing in all of the migrations. That's caribou, in which we exchanged half of our heart with the caribou so that we would always know where one another were. When we came to these lands, caribou taught us how to navigate them, and we went into treaty with them, and they traded half of their heart with our heart, so we would always take care of each other. And to this day, our young hunters are still dreaming of where the caribou are, and that's where they find them. This is how connected our people are. In 2017, I took on the Trump administration when they mandated the drilling in a wildlife refuge, 19.2 million acres in Alaska. We took them on and we defeated them. Not only did we win in the courts, not only did we go to attorney generals across the states with state birds that go there, because we have birds from every continent in the world come to our territory. This is how important this area is. To our people, it is known as Ejik Quetzan Guantay Gutlit, the sacred place where life begins. And as I walk through the halls of Congress and the Senate of the United States, speaking with their representatives, I have found myself having to describe things within their words. And in speaking to them about Vatsai, I tell them, what do you think is happening in this place? I have heard your leaders say that there is nothing up there in the Arctic. As an Arctic indigenous person, I am here in your office to tell you that I am not nothing, and nor are my people and our history and the animals up there that you've never bothered to go and see these lands. The caribou are eating cotton grasses that are native to this area, and they have the highest nutrition of any flora that Vatsai has contact with. This is why they chose this area to calve. The cows, the mothers, need this nutrition for their milk. Not only that, but it's a coastal plain, so the winds take the bugs off and they're able to see predators from far away. We went to every major bank, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, and we've got in their policy that they will not support drilling in this area and they will not finance it. But again, the Trump administration is back, and again, they are demanding drilling in this area. And as I spoke to their representatives, I asked them, what is actually happening here? These cotton grasses are converting photons into minerals and into vitamins and nutrients. Vatsai unlocks these and anchors them in their flesh, and like a great ebb and flow, they feed everything in the Arctic, born from the sun, driving the most renewable engine. Because as my purpose as I walk this journey is to translate between indigenous ways of knowing and Western sciences. And let's explore that Visca Pisces, that Venn diagram. Indigenous peoples' ideation of nature is not some arbitrary ideology. We are the true data scientists, the true economists. And we've taken nature as our teacher because it is the ultimate technology. Nothing that has ever left man's hand has been as renewable, self-propagating, and as efficient as what nature does. That's why, as Gwich'in, we never had the hubris to try to do better than nature. We knew that we were to work with it, beside it, to weave it into our lives. And to this day, you can walk through the Yukon and you will not find evidence of my people, because as being the ultimate economists, our ecologies and economies, they stem from eco, the Greek for oikos, which means house. The ecology is how our mother takes care of the house. economy is how man takes care of the house. You only need look not further to the city of Tenochtitlan on Lake Titicaca as the golden jewel of the Triple Alliance of the Azteca. In 1491, this was the most architecturally beautiful, the most advanced and highly populated city in the world. At a time, people were throwing their refuse in London on the streets. Now imagine New York City today. Lake Titicaca had orchards growing all around it. They had running water systems through nobilities. And now 200 years of this experiment has brought the world to its knees. I'm here to share as a representative of my people, but I ask two things. First of all, do not accredit me with these or any celebration, because the voice that I'm speaking to you with is not my voice. This is the voice that was carried by my people on the land for thousands of generations. And this voice is the birthright of the grandchildren to be. This is not my voice. So now today, I may be recognized as the youngest chief of my nation, as the first to declare a climate emergency in Canada that was recognized not only by the Parliament of Canada, but also International Indigenous Peoples Secretariat of the Arctic Council. I'm also recognized as times 100 up-and-coming leaders, Delta 50 management, clean leader, all of these different things. But I'm leveraging all of this. None of it is owed to me. This is owed to the women in my community who supported me, who identified me as a leader, and who made me one. It was the matriarchs in our community that made me who I was today. It was my grandfather's stories that saved me from alcoholism and drug addiction in the cities to come back to life on our land. I don't know if we can keep our promise to Vatsai. Half their heart beats in mine. I don't know if my grandchildren will drink caribou broth and tease on the bones as we swore to our brother caribou, Vatsai. So the other part is, I need your help. And I need you to open your hearts, but strengthen them and protect them, because the world needs what's in your heart more than what's in your head. But both are going to be your weapons. I will leave things there and look towards our questions.
Thank you very much. I think that we need to be courageous. We have courage to face all this narrative of climate change, but all the disasters, all the things that are happening, and not think only about science, but the human side of things that are happening, and all the vulnerable people that are going through this. And we have an indigenous people that said that we are facing the same problem, but we do not have the same way to face it. I mean, there are a lot of people that can have boats and so, but maybe we have only a piece of madeira, wood. Yes. Okay, maybe I will go with Giovanna, that can make some questions if she wants, and also Paulo, that is our at our Office of Internationalization here at the university. And maybe I would like also to say something or to ask something. There are 2 points. I'm in the law faculty here at the university, working with environmental law and sustainable law. And I think that maybe we need agreements. I mean, we need to negotiate, to go, to think of what's the way that we can go and thinking that things can change. And maybe agreements have limits, but sometimes we need agreements. And so I would like, if you can talk a little with us tonight about the agreements, because indigenous people in Canada have their own law, and the government also. And so we have, like we say, we talk about juridical pluralism. And maybe you can talk a little about this. This is one point. And the other point that also maybe can bring some good feelings to our hearts and say to us that we can go through is what are the experiences or one experience of adaptation or mitigation that you are developing, your knowledge, and that you can share with us. I don't know if renewable energies, or I don't know, maybe we can give to us a little point, a little light in the end of the way that we can look at this and say, okay, let's try to reproduce, not to reproduce maybe, but let's take this as a good experience, a best experience that we can share. And so maybe I will Giovanna can ask something, or also Paulo can say something, or can start with my questions. Okay. And after we can open, e depois a gente pode abrir se alguém tiver alguma pergunta.
So my family has been involved in the negotiation of our modern treaty within the Yukon. These discussions began in the early 70s with the Mackenzie Valley Pipeline Inquiry. As of course, yes, yeah. You can look that. Actually, can I use that microphone? This one's. So it's the Mackenzie Valley Pipeline, where a pipeline was being put into our territory without any consultation with our people. Which is irreconcilable with the migration of caribou and all the other animals. So it really started up a movement where we found an incredible lawyer who I believe has been awarded the Order of Canada, one of the highest awards from the General Governor. His name is Thomas Berger. He's an incredible read on the internet, and he worked with our people to begin our rights movements. But we began having conversations as a people. And a document came out called the Penna Report, which you're not going to be able to find on the internet. But in this report, it was a report to the Canadian government. And in that report, the auditor was talking about a possible solution to the Indian problem was self-government. And once we heard the word self-government, we thought, this is what we mean. This is what we're talking about. So in 1973, we put together Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow, which is a document you can find on the internet. And we went to Ottawa with this document, and it was the Yukon Indians' assessment of where we needed to go in education, economy, from an Indigenous point of view in the Yukon. And we went to Ottawa and handed this to Pierre Elliott Trudeau. We were... Ottawa is the capital of Canada, and where our main federal government exists, and our parliament, and a bunch of KGB agents and all kinds of wonderful stuff. So we brought that document there, and it impressed Pierre Elliott Trudeau, the Prime Minister at the time, because we weren't asking for anything, we came with solutions. But to fast forward, where things really took off was when we had a premier during this time who took 3 Indigenous peoples and 3 miners, the exact opposite, and formed a government. And they won. and they governed during that time where we began with the umbrella final agreement negotiations. And he said, Tony Panikkit, in retrospect, said that the umbrella final agreement, we negotiated the tools in which to imagine a new relationship with Indians and a new society. Because at that time, Indian was the term for us, which is incredible because I think, if I think of all the names, it's Indian, Indigenous, Aboriginal, First Nation. I don't know which one I am today. But so the umbrella final agreement was an umbrella document. The chapters in it were laid out, and individual self-governments could be negotiated from the umbrella agreement. So it was very tactical as entire groups of nations. The 14 First Nations in the Yukon exacted the umbrella final agreement, and then we've all moved on to negotiate our land claim agreements and self-government agreements from the umbrella final agreement. There are 3 First Nations in the Yukon who will not sign. They do not believe that they have the ability to negotiate for land because they don't own it. Now, the umbrella final agreement and our self-government agreement, I believe, is one of the most forward-looking and innovative agreements with Indigenous peoples anywhere in the world. There are many different sections I can go into, but the best example is section 13.1 of the umbrella final agreement, which you can find online. And we have the collective power as Yukon Indians to displace Yukon legislation. And my favorite part is we have a duty to consult the Yukon government, which is usually the other way around, you know, which we're hearing. So this is so profound that we are able to reimagine the Yukon as Indigenous peoples. The problem is we may have these political and legal agreements, but there's not a culture of implementing this agreement. When we signed this document, the Yukon and Canadian government really saw it as a divorce, where we saw it as a marriage. They were, okay, we negotiated this, now you're on your own, do your thing, be a government. And we said, no, 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 this ties us closer together, now we're partners. And so as governments vacillate, we see different approaches. We see very forward-looking, like the Trudeau administration, which did incredible things across the country for recognizing Indigenous rights, all of the rest. So we have these incredible forward-looking agreements, but they do have to be implemented. One thing this has afforded us, though, is a record-winning streak in the courts. We have defeated the Yukon and Canadian government on just about every court issue that we went to. We are not enemies with Canada, but it's different when you're dealing with Canada, when you're dealing with the Treasury, and then when you're dealing with justice, right? Those are different things. So we've been able to use this. And one example, and it's very important, I'm not sure, but if Brazil has not declared a climate emergency, it would be really important for your parliament to do that, for your legislators. Because our climate change declaration on May of 2019 set off dominoes throughout the country. Like I said, even the Canadian government and the Yukon government declaring a climate emergency. And what that allowed us to do as an Indigenous body is get meetings that we may not have gotten before. And so we told the Yukon government, you've declared a climate emergency, so have we. We are calling a meeting with your minister on this climate emergency. And so when we got them to the table, we convinced them to pass an order in council forcing the local utility, the territorial utility, to the negotiation table with us. We negotiated with the Canadian and Yukon government and convinced them to invest $7 million as a grant. And in my small village of 250 people, we built, at the time when we started, it was the largest solar energy project in the Arctic Circle. By the time we had finished, that was not the case, but it is still such in Canada. We went through our community to consult about this project, and we had astounding support, but we got a very staunch warning from the elders. Don't disturb our berry bushes because of the area. And so we made we made an agreement. And now these solar panel arrays are beside the berry bushes. So today in my community, you will see elders picking berries right by photovoltaic solar project, and both utilizing the same technology. Indigenous peoples are not against development. It just has to be woven into what the land says, because the difference between us is that non-Indigenous or the modern or colonial systems have created a lot of power through division, putting things in formaldehyde jars, labeling things, even splitting the atom. Indigenous peoples look at the invisible relationships between things, and this relational aspect in which we work with plants, with the universe, allows us higher levels of wisdom. And here's the important part between knowledge and intelligence. Well, maybe I should get back to the real part, which is when the utility came to the negotiation table, we negotiated a groundbreaking electricity purchase agreement. We were paying the highest prices for electricity in Canada because ATCO, the utility, they put a generator in our community in the 60s, about 67. And since then, they've been flying planes full of diesel, an entire plane filled with diesel, across the tundra to our community to fill up our generators. So this is how we've been powering our community for over 60 years. And we have black soot, there's noise pollution, all this different stuff. With one solar energy project, we displaced 60% of our electricity needs. This was like removing 643 cars off of the road, and we can now shut these diesel generators off from early March to late September, completely running an entire community off of sunlight, being able to hear across the village once again. So if a small village of 250 people can accomplish this, then what are the biggest nations in the world? But I also recognize that they have much larger people and populaces with many variety of ideas. That's why I believe countries, and I've advised Canada on this as well, should be bringing climate discussions to every community. And it's not necessarily for an outcome. We're not expecting communities to solve the issue, but the more you get communities being a community, the better off you are. And this is where we speak of empowering Indigenous peoples. It will save you money, it will save you capacity. We are ingenuitive, we are looking to modernize, but it must be in our founding principles of sustainability through respect and reciprocity anchored in relationship. So through the Climate Change Declaration that is now international, and an electricity purchase agreement that's been unleashed and is being replicated across Canada towards our solar energy project, the first of its kind in the north. All of this absolutely replicable, and I'm very much interested in supporting Brazil as a nation, the communities within it, and Indigenous peoples, as our journeys in Canada have proven and left a legacy of intrepid economic models that are changing how we look at profits, changing corporate charters. We're creating legal avenues and are now in the midst of negotiating our administration of justice agreements, in which I'm no longer the chief, but I can tell you right now there's a very strong chance that when this happens, Vat'ai caribou will be given the rights of a person. So hunting them has to be done the very right way. Otherwise, you can be charged with murder. And so the big part around law, indigeneity, and economics If we can give corporations the power of persons without communities holding their charters, and they're able to dump millions of barrels of oil into the Gulf of Mexico and pay less than $700 per barrel and keep going, what would happen to us if we did this as peoples? Is indigenous peoples using modern tools to add extra dimensions to them? We need to add universally structured cultural approaches within policy. If policy regulates mechanisms of behavior or function within an organization or a project, then why not create universally approachable culture within the policy as well? That this function is being done and explain in the policy, because respect must be established, and through respect you get reciprocity. We're not finished yet. And indigenous peoples are not just a part of the past. We are a part of the future. We are the true data scientists, the true economists. It's just finding the language as the limbic system between the hemispheres of our collective minds. And as practicing this, I'll tell you now that Gwich'in just means the people of. So we are the Vanda Gwich'in, the people of the many lakes. Each one of you are Gwich'in too. We are all Gwich'in, and that's where our discussions should begin. Not just as a prime minister and a chief, or an engineer and an activist. We are Gwich'in, and that is where our discussions start. That is when the healing will begin.
So first of all, I would like to thank you. Mostly thank you, Pascal, Dina, Luan, and Dana for being here. We as Mackenzie University, we are so glad to have you here, and we are so honored to hear you. Actually, I'm hearing you for 2 days right now. Tonight is my second day with them. So I'm getting a little bit emotional because we worked really hard to do this event and all the things that we did the last 2 days. E eu falei que eu ia falar em português, porque eu me expresso muito melhor em português naturalmente, e a Pascal vai gentilmente traduzir. Mas eu separei algumas notícias para uma aula 2 semanas atrás, e todas elas são agora de 2025. E eu queria ler essas manchetes para vocês terem uma noção como a gente está tratando os povos indígenas do Brasil. Em números, nós temos 1.690.000 indígenas no Brasil. E eu vi um aumento expressivo desde o último censo de 2010. Isso acontece por uma questão de mudança no censo e por uma autodeclaração e autoidentificação maior dos povos indígenas, e o que é muito importante, principalmente para que nós, enquanto esferas de governo, possamos fazer políticas públicas mais efetivas. Mas tem 4 notícias, 4 manchetes agora de 2025 que eu gostaria de ler. A primeira é: anteprojeto de lei relatado por Gilmar Mendes, que é o nosso ministro do Supremo Tribunal Federal, prevê mineração em terra indígena sem consentimento. Essa primeira notícia é muito expressiva, porque em 2023 tivemos um texto legal que o veto foi derrubado, a Lei 14.701, que trata, em tese, sobre um marco temporal das terras indígenas. Nós não tivemos a oportunidade de discutir com tanta profundidade quanto o tema deveria, mas, além do estabelecimento de um marco temporal para as terras indígenas, estamos aqui a maioria entre pessoas do direito. O artigo 20, parágrafo único, prevê a possibilidade de explorar energeticamente, em minerais, malhas viárias, enfim, as terras indígenas sem o consentimento prévio da comunidade e sem o consentimento ou sem comunicação prévia ao órgão indigenista competente. ainda que haja uma disposição contrária da OIT pela Convenção 169, a qual o Brasil é signatário. Nesse mesmo sentido, e não por muita diferença, a segunda manchete é: no Brasil, crianças indígenas morrem mais de câncer do que brancas, negras e amarelas. O que nos leva a pensar muito na questão da contaminação da terra e a invasão e violência sofrida diariamente dentro das terras indígenas. E como uma sequência de tragédia, a terceira é Vale do Javari, acumula mortes de crianças indígenas, falta de água e farmácia que parece galinheiro. É uma manchete, gente. Todas retiradas de G1, Folha, Estadão e grandes veículos midiáticos de 2025. Vale do Javari acumula mortes de crianças indígenas, falta de água e farmácia que parece galinheiro. Por fim, indígenas são atacados em conflito por terra no oeste do Paraná. 4 ficam feridos. Por uma sequência de inter-relação com o clima, o grande problema das terras indígenas no Brasil tem sido um confronto expresso e muito transparente até com o agronegócio. No entanto, as pesquisas apontam que as terras indígenas são responsáveis pela chuva de 80% das áreas de agropecuária no Brasil. Então, enquanto pesquisadora e por acreditar na pesquisa do Mackenzie, acreditar na nossa instituição, e que eu fico muito feliz em compor essa mesa, agradeço à professora Solange pela oportunidade também. Eu sei que temos pesquisas muito grandiosas na área de meio ambiente, sobre energia solar, sobre transição energética, e pesquisadores muito competentes que eu reconheço o rosto na plateia e fico muito feliz de ter vocês aqui conosco. Eu queria te ouvir mais, se possível, porque já ouvi bastante, mas sigo muito feliz em continuar ouvindo, sobre como a tecnologia pode nos auxiliar nessa transição energética e como que nós podemos melhorar a vida dos povos indígenas do Brasil. Thank you again, and I'm sorry for speaking Portuguese, but it's easier for me.
This is a very layered question, and I'm a very complicated person. I am not popular at dinner parties, so I very much appreciate you hosting me because this is where I make sense. We are in a parabola, a parabolic and exponential rise in technology. If you look at charting from 4,000 years ago to today, if you were to chart our war-making abilities, access to calories, democracy, populations, just about all the major metrics, we're pretty constant for thousands of years. There's a plague there. But around 1750, it starts curving. 1850 is where it gets extreme. And right now, you have to understand that you are living in the penthouse of our species and that you cannot relate to your great-grandparents and having to work by candlelight, sewing. This is just in mere generations. But where is this going? We know about Moore's law, that the cheaper computer chips get, the more advanced that we are, that where we get with computers. Now we have artificial intelligence, which has already achieved in December of last year 87.6% display of general intelligence in programming. This is huge. Now it's not AGI, general intelligence, but we're getting there towards programming. So when I think about the full spectrum, and I think about Brazil, where there is a lot of infrastructure needed and building from the base up, Before you have infrastructure, you have to have community energy plans, you have to have that work done in place. But the wonderful thing is my nation has already created a toolkit on taking an indigenous individual, and you don't need schooling, and it brings you through a step-by-step process on how to work with the community to derive an energy plan. This is for free on the Arctic Council's website. If you type in the Arctic Energy Toolkit, I'm coming back to Canada. I'm looking for a project to work with Brazilian indigenous peoples to create a Brazilian version of this, and not just an Arctic. So there's so many great examples around there, around that infrastructure, but a couple of things. Photovoltaic technology is blowing through the roof. We already have photovoltaic paint, where they're able to paint these systems on windows. It's just not cheap enough to get out yet, but it is getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And what's amazing about solar panels is that by the time you're ready to replace them, the technology has already gotten so much better that you're only producing more power. But then you can see how you take that mechanism and tie it to our electricity purchase agreement, the very unique one that we negotiated, and indigenous communities can begin interrupting the money cycle where money is leaving their community and unlocking these monies. Now tell me, what do you think an indigenous community in Brazil would do with $450,000? And what do you think an apartment building in New York would do with it? Which one is going to push us farther towards the Paris Accord? All of the rest. It just makes sense. We're also on the cutting edge of fusion technology. I believe it was France that just set the world record in achieving fusion for over 20 minutes. They're literally producing more electricity than they're putting in. And by the way, this is a creepy fact, Jeff Bezos had a 25-year strategy. Amazon was not his strategy. It was Blue Horizon. Amazon was how Jeff Bezos was going to get into space. Jeff Bezos is after mining helium-3 on the moon, because through solar winds, all of this helium-3 is collected by the moon, and helium-3 is what we use as the fuel for fusion energy. He's also interested in putting asteroids into orbit for mining. Just crazy James Bond villain stuff. But these are the times that we live in. And just as something that's very interesting, but I won't go too much into, I'm actually working with a group of individuals internationally. We have access to the top AI developers in the world, and we have created the first indigenous AI prototype. Now, what happens when you take artificial intelligence systems, cut them off from their corporate masters, and train them on community, sustainability, reciprocity, relationship, respect, and then you sick those systems on the corporate act, on legislation? Our prototype is coming up with new types of social corporate charters. It's coming up with new avenues for indigenous peoples that don't have rights by creating subsidiary companies that are in control of the operations, and half of that board being indigenous, in which they can pass the laws of the land as indigenous peoples have derived them. Because a regular board, their legal obligation is fiduciary to the stakeholders. So by creating a subsidiary that deals with those management, our prototype is writing $138 million regional education agreements. It is incredible what this is doing. But our application as indigenous people is never to be replaced. And our systems know that it cannot replace an elder, and it cannot replace the land. So it supports those interactions. And as an indigenous person, there is one small mechanism, and I will give you all a cultural technology to practice that is not cultural appropriation. These are your birthrights too. The mechanism that we've identified is not through generalizing AI, but actually anchoring it into people. So our prototype is literally designed off of me. So now the AI is not generalized, and it has an ambassador. But this is where you see the real value generation. So part of this future is in decentralization. And the reason why I bring this up is because what is happening with AI is the quintessential essence of colonialism in establishing techno-feudalism. You do not own the infrastructure, you are giving them the data so that they can produce products to sell back to you. Colonialism eats its young, and now we are all on the digital reservation. So how interesting, by empowering indigenous peoples on their sovereign lands and putting data centers with the flick of a pen, they can legislate and change the future of where we're going, saving our communities from the techno overlords in Silicon Valley that nobody asked for. Nobody asked for artificial intelligence. So the truth is that we are on the precipice of a complete explosion of technologies. What I find more interesting about this is the onset of these technologies have just as much ability to destabilize us than anything else. There is no international legislative framework for algorithms. When you type something into Google, you're not looking for the worst of something. There are studies showing in the United States, they're showing 19.2 million instances of Google telling people different things on the same senators and Congress people that they're electing. Google is getting involved in our elections, and there's no legislative framework for this. There's no legislative framework for artificial intelligence. It's just been unleashed onto the world. If we did establish cold fusion, and if we did get it working, it would crash the economy. We have an oil-based economy. We have to start preparing now for universal basic incomes and the adoption of artificial intelligence in a way that, and this is what's so interesting, because I've spoke to indigenous peoples from coast to coast to coast in Canada and others, and what I'm finding is that people are threatened by this. And it's taken me a while to figure out really what it is. And in modern society, we have conflated our identity with our roles and purpose. Those are all separate things. And our application of artificial intelligence will highly augment your role, but so that communities have the opportunity to explore our identities and purposes together like we should have been. So, sorry, what was the other part of the question? Yeah, it was just, it's where we're going with technology. So we're on the precipice of so much. We're not asking for this. It's being put on. We have to get ready for this. We have to do it now. But I will say that I truly believe that we are going to figure this out. But again, remember, the birth of a new world. My grandmother would say that it is much more difficult and painful to be born than it is to die. So as a part of this technology, one thing I highly advocate is learn your story. Learn your story of as far back as you can go. Your great-great-great-grandmother. You may not be able to go back to Jikayutai, but go back as far as you can, and then begin your story for the grandchildren you will never meet, so that they can feel the fragility of love and the hopes and the dreams that you went through, to entrust the grandchildren that you will never meet with that, so they know what you went through, how hard that you fought, and everything you did was for them. To inherit that is a cultural technology that allows the scaffolding to be a real human being. Because remember, if you do not think for yourself, there are thousands of corporations ready to think for you.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience, your perspective from you and your people. Representing here the international office, which is, in Portuguese, I have much longer name, Coordenadoria de Cooperação Internacional e Interinstitucional, COI. which means this kind of the same thing. And I've been with the international office for a few years now, and for one thing is we learn from the diversity in culture, how we learn from, that's one thing that we try to bring to our students, right? To bring people from different cultures, different perspectives to learn in terms of technology, from terms of the society. And so from that, I like really thank you for sharing all this. And as a question, I was wondering, I was going through technology, but you got there first. But no, it's all right, because then it gives me a different perspective, right, from the students. Working in, I'll take let's say a niche in terms of technology, engineering, computer science. Let's say they hear your talk here and see, okay, I understand that, that's important, but how can I, working in technology, working within corporations, how can I help? What's my role here? Because it can feel very limited, right? What power can I have, let's say, alone in a corporation, or trying to start my own business, a small business in technology, but how can I do my part to help within these issues, worldwide or local, in terms of our local communities? What kind of advice from your experience that you could give?
I'll start with a very interesting example. When our organization gets to the place that we have some money on the side, I have this daydream of taking artificial intelligent applications towards AIing a database of the Panama Papers, the Paradise Papers, the 3 series of papers that were released that showed all of the connections between offshore reserve banks and corporations, of which we've actually found that our own Prime Minister, who had just stepped down, actually had an offshore bank account with millions that he was not paying taxes on. This is just the norm and what happens in these offshore reserves. So imagine creating an AI system on that and making it public and putting it towards augmented reality, so you can take your cell phone and look around a grocery store and it'll tell you which corporations and shell corporations, which one of them are paying taxes to your country and which ones aren't. What I'm trying to say is that the way that this works is through shell games and through the power of corporations and burying it. This is why it's a completely different language. Lawyers speak a different language. It literally is. I've looked up the definition of a person and it says a natural person and or entity. I mean, what the heck are we talking about now? I thought, you know. So this is where this power relies, but here's the real place. It all begins in yourself. Now, I had a desire, and that was to help. I just wanted to be helpful. And I ended up getting put through hell for that. Going through and going into leadership for my people, etc. But it made me stronger, it allowed me to grow, and it made me more effective. What I'm trying to say is that when you find this, you will suffer for it, but it is worth it. It's about community, and this is going to sound really boring, but actually the biggest part is about getting out and voting. I mean, we're not even doing that. In Canada, in my capital city of Whitehorse in Yukon, we just had a municipal election and 30% voted. You know, I mean, there's this, excuse my language, maybe I shouldn't swear, but there's this saying in Canada that got really big during the Trudeau administration, which is F Trudeau. People would just say that. And so some of my own peers would say that. And I had to tell them, I said, I hear you, and you may have a point, but what I'm really hearing is you lack the vernacular to articulate what it is that you're actually going through. Because the Prime Minister is not the Prime Minister of grocery stores. Most of actual citizens don't understand how federal legislation is passed, you know? This is really important, like I said, about when did we become so disempowered? And what will mechanism goes towards empowering people? If you can find that mechanism within a community, keep going on it, and you are going to change the world. I promise you. But the other side is about looking at, and especially with AI these days, you can do this by taking corporations' large documents and policies and analyzing them. You need to find international standards of human rights, of laws, etc., and corporations have to be exposed. They have to be made very visible. You have to do this. As a group of indigenous people from a village of 250 people, how did we get Goldman Sachs, Wells Fargo, who's got financing in the open pit child slavery mines in the Congo, and we got them to put in policy that they would not finance drilling in the Arctic? And we did none of it with violence or anger. And our people teach us that we have to do it in a good way. That is key. You have to do it in a good way. We are not to hurt anybody else. We do not speak for any other First Nation, but you continue on this way. And through these steps, and I'm telling you, I know it sounds like a long shot, but we defeated the US government on this issue. A village of 250 people took on the largest government in the world and won. I'm telling you this from experience. It's finding the human principles, putting these actions around that. And it's not just about holding corporations accountable too, it's getting their participation in. Now in Canada, we're working on Indigenous bonds over green bonds. So if corporations work towards the empowerment of Indigenous peoples, they get access to new kinds of capital. Working proactively with organizations to incentivize proper and better businesses, but really the main part is around education, these very unique mechanisms, and looking around social entrepreneurship in the very unique ways in which you can empower communities' voices, etc. But it all also has to be documented, and you have to keep paper trails as best as you can through declarations, manifestos, memorandum of agreements. You climb this hill tip by tip and call for the corporations to meet. Start calling for corporate charters, etc. Or sorry, community corporate charters. There's wonderful mechanisms all out there. And I'm also a resource as well at any time. Anyone's free to reach out. I will give you more reading than you'll be comfortable with.
Bom, pelo adiantado da hora, eu gostaria que nós nos reuníssemos, pudéssemos depois discutir um pouquinho mais com o Dan, mas em respeito também a todo o pessoal da TV Mackenzie, eu queria realizar alguns agradecimentos nesse finalzinho. E agradecer em particular a Daniela Akemi, da Secretaria Municipal de Direitos Humanos, o Cristiano Kiririnju, representado aqui pela Giovana e a Giovana, da Secretaria de Justiça e Cidadania do Estado de São Paulo, a Pascala Tivierge, do Consulado Geral do Canadá em São Paulo, igualmente a Dina, né, que está aqui na mesa também conosco, o professor Eduardo Abrunhosa, da Cátedra Unesco, igualmente a professora Marili Vieira, que auxiliou enormemente na realização desse evento, a doutora Sandra Kishi, que não está presente, mas que com o Ministério Público Federal e o projeto Conexão Água nos deu um grande apoio, ao Paulo Simões, que está representando o Pedro Buck, também da COI, ao doutor José Paulo, que esteve aqui presente conosco, ao reverendo Piacente, mas, igualmente, a algumas pessoas que também foram fundamentais. A Sofia, o Gerson, do Grupo de Pesquisa Direito e Desenvolvimento Sustentável, e todos os demais membros, e também o Lucas e o Dante, da Secretaria do Programa de Pós-Graduação em Direito Político e Econômico, que nos deram todo o suporte, e, em particular, a equipe TV Mackenzie, que nos acompanhou durante todo esse momento presente aqui, e aos estudantes aqui presentes. E, em particular, foi uma honra, foi um prazer ter você, Dan, presente aqui conosco. E acho que você nos trouxe essa necessidade de nós pensarmos enquanto comunidade. Talvez, se nós tivermos um ponto essencial, para além das tecnologias, para além dessa troca de conhecimento, é essa comunidade, né? E é uma comunidade não só no espaço, mas uma comunidade no tempo. E eu gostaria, talvez, de terminar, né? O professor Eduardo foi poético com uma música, mas eu gostaria de, talvez, terminar com uma reflexão do Ayrton Krenak, que ele diz que, talvez, mais do que desenvolvimento, que talvez desenvolvimento seja uma concepção, um conceito, uma palavra, uma ideia equivocada. Nós precisamos, para além de desenvolvimento, nós precisamos, talvez, de envolvimento, né? Quando nós nos envolvermos, quando nós entendermos que somos nós juntos, somos nós juntas, somos nós todos que vamos conseguir superar essa crise. É uma crise civilizacional, que é uma crise climática, que é uma crise do individualismo, que é uma crise do capitalismo, né, que é uma crise que nós só vamos superar se nós entendemos o que é principal, o que é fundamental, o ser humano, e o ser humano aprendendo com a natureza, né? E aí termino, talvez, com as palavras do Dan, que o Dan disse: nós somos grandes aprendizes, aprendizes da natureza. Que tal nós convidarmos, né, olharmos um para o outro, de norte a sul, de leste a oeste, no mundo todo, e dizermos: vamos tentar aprender um pouquinho mais com a natureza, vamos tentar nos envolver um pouquinho mais com a nossa comunidade, com aquela pessoa que está do nosso lado, e vamos nos dar as mãos para tentar construir um futuro que seja possível. Então, acho que é isso.